Hey everybody, in this video we're going to be showing you a great way of painting a Saurus Warrior of the Seraphon for Warhammer Age of Sigmar by Games Workshop. And what we're going to be doing is painting it in the colour scheme that they appear on the box. So this is that classic sort of turquoise bluish green colour. And it's a really nice colour, looks great on the battlefield, and it's really fun to paint too. So we hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you at the desk. When it comes to painting a Saurus Warrior in this colour scheme, what we need to do is start out with an undercoat colour that works really well for all the colours that we're going to apply. And in this case, either a grey or a blue undercoat will be great for the initial colour that we need to use. Now in this case, I've gone for grey, so the colour I picked out is standard grey from the Colour Forge. And what we need to do is start out by painting the main colour for the flesh all across the body of our Saurus. Now the colour to use for this is Sotek green, and to apply it I recommend you go for an older rough base coating brush. That's exactly what I've got here. This is my old medium base brush here from Citadel, and with it we just need to get some of this ready on the palette, just making sure we thin the paint down with just a little bit of water as usual, just to make sure it's nice and smooth. Just being careful not to overdo it with a brush like this, because it does absorb a lot of water very quickly. Once you've got that paint thinned down to about this point, we're ready to start applying it onto the miniature, and we're looking for all the flesh and scales at this stage. Don't worry about anything else, because we'll just neaten that up as we get to it, but definitely make sure you apply this colour as two thin coats, because it can be a little bit weak in some places, so just make sure you apply that thin coat across the entire miniature. Then once it's dry, go back and apply a second coat in the exact same way. Apply those thin coats until you've got a nice even finish to that bluish green colour on all the scales and things too. And with that done, we can now move on to applying a wash onto this miniature to start to get some definition in there. And we again want a sort of bluish green wash here. So Coelia Greenshade is a great choice for it. However, this shade is quite strong straight out of the pot. So what I'm going to do is dilute it with some Lahmian medium, just take the edge off it so it doesn't overwhelm the model and make it too dark. Now we're looking for about a 50-50 mix here. And so what we need to do is start out by setting that up on the palette. To do it, what I've got is a monster brush here from the Army Painter. So a nice large brush, good size for the sort of thing that we're doing here. What we're going to do is start out with the colour just so you can clearly see what I'm doing with 3 brushfuls there of that colour. You can see just what I mean about how strong and how dark this particular paint is. So what we then need is that medium. So 1 brushful and 2 and then 3, and then it's just a matter of mixing those together. And so what we're looking for is a wash of about this sort of strength here, you see, so no longer as strong as it was straight out the pot. And with that prepared, you just need to load up a generous amount on your brush and then start applying it to your Saurus Warrior. And we want to paint it all over the scales and flesh once again. So it's just a matter of applying it like this and letting it settle as it will in the recesses. Just being careful to make sure that you don't overdo it and start letting it pool too much. So for example, if I got a lot on my brush just here and we put it down on the hand, you can see how it can really start to pool and create blobs and things at the extremities where it hangs off. Now if you spot that happening, just use your brush to soak away the excess and then just redistribute it elsewhere around the miniature until you get to about this sort of strength across the various details. Once you have painted it all over, give it plenty of time to dry. It's going to take around about 45 minutes before you can move on to the next step. The wash is now completely dry, and so what we can do now is move on to the next phase, which is going to be to start to lighten up that skin tone. And for this, what we need to do first is return to Sotek green, only this time we're going to dry brush it onto the miniature. So we'll start to pick out the texture using this technique. Now for it, what I've got is a small dry brush here from Citadel, so a good size for the kind of thing we're doing here, though any sort of dry brush of about this size will be absolutely fine. With it, we just need a small amount of this paint on the brush and then get some tissue and use it to work it into the bristles, whilst also removing the excess paint. We need to work our way along until we're getting about this sort of appearance on the paper here, you see. So it's starting to get a little bit, well, faded almost. That's the kind of thing we want to go for. And with that prepared, then we can start applying it to the body once again. And so again, we're looking for all the flesh and scales. The trick this time though is just to be a little bit lighter with the motion on the back, which is going to be sort of a flicking motion like this, just gently back and forth to mostly catch the edges of the texture as we go along. But as you get round towards the front, let's get a little bit heavier with it. So on the chest, start doing a rounded motion like this, almost buffing it, because this way the colour will be stronger here. And so we start the process of the model being lighter on the underside on the belly and darker on the scales on the back. Once you finish that step, you're then ready to take it a little bit lighter, and so now what we're going to do is move into some Temple Guard Blue. And again, to begin with, we want to dry brush with this, using the same sort of process as before, being quite light on the back and then getting heavier on the belly. Now I'm going for the same dry brush here, it's the same small dry brush from Citadel, and just made sure it is completely dry before starting this process, because if it's not, you can get quite a streaky appearance. So definitely make sure it's completely dry. And then just like before, you only need a small amount of this paint on your brush, and then on the tissue, start working it into the brush whilst moving it along to see how you're doing there and what sort of level of paint's left on your brush. When you get to about this point here of this sort of strength, you're then ready to apply it. And just like before, on the back of the miniature, first of all, we're looking for that light flicking motion just to start to pick out the texture of these scales. So just very gently like this, so you can see the colours catching those corners and edges all the way down here like this. Then as we get around to the front, it's time to get heavier. So again, it's that buffing motion, just a little bit lighter than before, just to gradually build up that colour, so you can see we're starting to get that lighter blue appearing on the belly. I've finished building up that dry brush now, and you can see how we've got generally that light colour on the front now, and it's a little bit darker on the back, but we do have that colour there showing as highlights. And so now what we're going to do is just accentuate that a little bit more, still using some Temple Guard Blue, but this time we're going to apply it in a more traditional way. And for this I've gone for quite a small brush. I've got my size 00 here, because we're both going to highlight and layer at the same time with this. Now what we need to do is just get some of this ready on the palette and thin down so it's nice and translucent. So just add water to it to really bring it right down to about this sort of level here. And we can test it by just spreading it out on the palette. See there, it's just a little bit see-through, so that's the sort of thing we're going for. Just a touch more water to it. There we go. And with that prepared then, we only need a small amount. And with this, first of all, what we need to do is just strengthen the colour that's on the front of the model. So this part that we've got on the chest and the belly, I'm just going to thinly lay it onto the middle of this area now. So just smoothly applying it across the middle like this, thinly applied so the colour beneath shows through, just being careful to avoid the recesses as we go. So largely following the pattern that's been marked out for us by the dry brush. Now what this will do is strengthen the colour, but you can see how I'm just focusing towards the middle. It means the softer colour remains on the outside, so it just fades it and blends it into the surrounding darker colour as we go around the back of the miniature. The same is going to be true as we go further down the chest here. Just look for the muscles and just go for the more raised areas. Avoid the deeper recesses and leave them dark as you work your way down. Now meanwhile, we need to do this on the face as well. So we're looking for areas such as the front, where we want to pick out this almost horn that we've got with quite a strong bit of that colour. Follow it around there and start to pick out these raised features of the face. But as you get round towards the back, in this case it's more of a highlight that we need to do now, and we're looking at the more obvious ones like these spines. I just want to edge highlight these, so it's just a quick flick of the brush, just making sure we're using the side of it, following along that sharp edge on these spines so we get that nice highlight on those parts. Same on the sides, and just turn the model so you're comfortable as you do this. Again, just angle, so you're using the side of the brush, just gently skim across these areas to help them stand out there like that. With that done, you can see the light colour is now stronger and a bit more consistent on the front of the miniature, and we've also got that sharper detail standing out nicely on the back. And so what we can do is now move on to a final highlight, and for this we're again going to use some Temple Guard Blue, but now we need to mix a bone colour into it. So here I'm going to use some Vampire Fang. Now I need to set this up on the palette first of all, and I'm still using my size 00 brush for it, and we can see we've got the two paints next to each other. What we need to do is just start bringing them together in the middle. So we're looking for, to begin with, a roughly 50-50 colour to get a really nice light blue there like that. And once you've got that mixed up, we just need to thin it down with that water as usual, just to make sure it's nice and smooth so it's ready to be applied. Now if you want to, you can take this a little bit further, just setting up here by mixing a slightly lighter tone, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But what we're going to do is start out with this one just here, and what we need to do with it is first of all start highlighting on the front of the miniature. So we're looking for areas that are a bit more defined and are standing out. So for example, this part of the neck just going down here, we just want to follow these raised up areas just to help them pop out a little bit. And also what we can do is just make sure it's nice and thin and start applying it onto the lighter parts of the body underneath here. Just a bit more focused towards the middle, just very gently applied like that, so we get that little brighter colour appearing in the middle of the body. Just getting more narrow, following that part of the body as we go around the sides just there. Then as we get to the muscles a bit further down, we can follow those by looking for the more raised up areas and just picking those out. Now on the back of the body, we need to be a little bit more subtle here, and instead we're now looking for the sharpest, most defined features. So on these spines, it's really going to be another edge highlight, but focused towards the tip of each one. So along there, for example, you see using the side of the brush, skimming along that sharp edge and just picking those parts out to make them look nice and sharp. On the face is the same sort of thing, where it's a fine highlight now. So we're looking at things like the front of this spine, or right at the front of the face just there. Again, using the side of the brush. We can go around the side of the mouth as well, so picking it out around here. We've also got the crest going up here, going around the eyes, this sort of thing, all these sharp edges. And once that's done, if you want to, we can then grab that slightly lighter tone that we just mixed, and with this, we just apply it just onto the very sharpest parts on the face. So we're looking at just the tip of these crest horn things up here, and also the front of the mouth just around here. And with that, you can see now that blue flesh is complete. And we've got those nice highlights there in the front and on the back of the body too over those scales. And with that done, what we can now do is move on to those other smaller details around the miniature, because whilst we've physically painted most of it with that flesh, there are lots of little details. And all of these can be washed at the same time with just one wash. So the most efficient way of doing this is to base coat them all together, then wash them together. So we'll start out with the metallics. The first one of these is the most important to the metallics because it's the signature one of these guys. What we're looking at here is a nice warm gold. So in this case, I'm going to use some dragon's gold. Now after that, if you look on the shields and the box artwork, you can see they have some other metallics on there for a bit of variety, and you can use any you want here. In our case though, what we're going to use is some Castellax bronze. But first of all, what we need is that dragon's gold, and to apply it, I've got my size 1 brush now, because this is a nice large size for the larger areas, but it's a good idea to have a smaller brush on hand for some of the finer details, because these are scattered all across the miniature, and they're all shapes and sizes as you go along. But the key thing is to make sure that you got that paint thin correctly, and that you've got a fine point on your brush there, so just use the palette as you need to make sure your brush isn't overloaded. Then it's time to start looking for these features. Now the most obvious one is the shield, and at this stage I recommend you just paint the entire thing in. So we just want to block the whole shield in at this stage, just nice and smoothly like that to get that nice shiny gold. But also, as I mentioned, keep an eye out for all the smaller features, and these will appear in forms of things like bangles and decorations. So for example, on the ankle down here, you can see we've got this one just going around here. When you get to details like this, just really take your time and be as neat as possible so as not to get onto that blue flesh. Once you've found all that gold, it's time to move on to your second metallic of choice, and in this case I'm using some Castellax bronze, and that's for the shield here, just to break it up, because right now it is a very large area of gold. So it's just a matter of looking for these patterns and just picking out some details and neatly blocking them in. And to do this, I've switched down to my size 00 brush once again, just for a bit more accuracy. Once you're happy with the colours on that shield, the next thing to do is to pick out a few other base coats on the miniature, and we're going to start out with the club, and here the main part of it is stone, so what we need is a dark grey. So here I'm going to use some dungeon stone grey, and with that done it's then time to pick out all the leather straps, and we want a nice warm brown here to contrast nicely with that blue skin. So what we're going to use is some boar hide for this. But first of all we need that dungeon stone grey, and to apply it I've gone to my size 1 brush once again, and for this we're just looking to neatly base coat this in, going around all those gold spikes that appear on it. So having it applied this way really helps out with working around those details. It's nice and easy to get around them this way. So make sure that paint's nice and smooth, and then it's time to start applying it in this area. So what we're looking for is this sort of region here, this main body of the club. Just want to neatly go up to that gold there like that, just making sure it's nice and neat as you get next to it, and then otherwise just block it in entirely. Once you've finished with that grey, we can then move on to a warm reddish brown colour. So here I'm using some boar hide, and I've switched right down to my 00 brush once again, because now we're looking for all these leather straps, and you can see they're quite delicate to get to. Just really take your time, making sure your brush isn't overloaded, and be as neat as you can as you pick these all out. Once you've finished picking out all of those straps, we've just got a few more little base coats left to do before we move on to that wash, and that is all about painting the inside of the mouth and also picking out all the claws. And for the mouth, first of all, what we need is a burgundy colour for all things like the tongue, that sort of thing. And so for this I'm going to use some sword hilt burgundy, and then we need to pick out the teeth and the claws. For this we want a darker bone colour, so I'm going to use some dragon fang for this. But first of all I'm going to go for that sword hilt burgundy, and to apply it I'm using the 00 brush once again for that fine control, because this is all around the face really, well all around the mouth, so we need that control as we start working into there. As ever, just make sure you thin that paint down until it's nice and smooth and you're ready to go. So we want to bring it down to around about that point there, and then with that prepared it's just a matter of painting it into this area. So what we're looking at is all of the tongue at this stage, so we want to make sure we get this, and also this little bit that's visible just next to the scales right there. Once you've got the inside of the mouth there, you're then ready to move on to picking out bone details. So here we're looking at teeth and claws, and for this I'm using some dragon fang, and we want to just gently move in and just pick these out as neatly as possible. And with that, we've now finished applying all those details that need that wash, so it's time to put the wash on there. And in this case, what we need to do is add a dark brown wash over all these colours, which they'll all benefit from at the same time. So what I'm going to use here is some Battle Mud wash. And to apply it, I'm going to start out with my size 1 brush for larger areas, like the shield, for example, but definitely have a smaller brush on hand because you'll need that finer control in areas like inside the mouth, because you must keep this off the blue and just on those new colours that we've introduced since. So use the palette as you need to, just to gauge how much is on your brush. And when you're ready, it's time to start applying it onto these features. And so, for example, if I start on the shield, what we need to do is just paint it directly over all these areas so that it stains it a little bit and settles in the recesses, giving us that shading and definition. Allow that wash to completely dry, and then you can see we've got that nice shading settled in on the miniature. However, on that gold, it has dulled it down quite a bit, and one of the distinctive features about Seraphon is having really bright, shiny gold equipment. And so what we need to do, just spend a little bit of time now just returning that shine before we move on to our highlights. So what we're going to do is go back to some Dragon's Gold first of all, and layer this onto those gold areas. And what we're looking for is a nice thin application of this colour. So really we bring that shine back, but don't lose the depth of colour that we've just gained from that shading. So what I've gone for now is a size 0 brush, so a sort of medium to small size brush just here, and on the palette we just want to bring that paint down to around about this consistency, you see, so a little bit translucent. And with that prepared, then let's get a small amount on your brush, and then we're looking for those gold features once more. But this time, rather than painting it entirely over them, we're just looking to avoid the recesses where more of that wash settled. So for example, on the shield just on the front right here, we're looking at applying it to these sort of areas just here, making sure we're getting that flat part and just bringing it around there to get that shine back. But you can see I'm just being careful not to fall into that recess just as it meets the rim just there. So just skip past it and carry on again on the other side. And this way we retain that definition, but you can see that shine is returning to the gold. And with that, all that gold detail is nice and shiny once more. However, we did do that other metallic colour on the shield, remember, that Castellax bronze that we did around there, and you might have done the same colour or a different metallic, but if you have done this, then also it's a good idea just to spend a moment layering that too, just to make that shiny as well. So we're going to do that quickly now, going back to Castellax bronze, and to apply it I'm using the exact same brush, so still that size 0 for this one. And we're just looking to quickly layer that part that's visible there. So again, looking for the flatter area towards the middle where there's no recesses, and just gently applying this over the top with a thin coat and avoiding those corners so we retain that definition from the wash. So with that paint prepared for the purpose, we're looking at areas such as around here, and it's just a matter of very carefully working in towards the middle of these zones, just being careful to leave that darker line where that recess is, where this colour meets that gold. And there we are, we now have that shine return to the darker metal too, and so we can move on to the next step, which is going to be to return to that yellower gold and exaggerate that a little bit more. Because remember, this is one of the key features of this army, to have that very clean, very shiny gold. And so what we need is a lighter gold, and I'm going to use some glistening gold for this. And the idea here is to start to glaze this onto the flatter parts, the more raised up parts, to really emphasize that shine on those areas. So to do it, what we need to do is thin this paint right down on the palette, and quite a lot too, and I'm using a small brush for it. I've got my size 00 once again, and what I'm going to do is just get some water there on my palette next to the paint, then start bringing it into it to create that very thin version of it. And we're looking for something like this, you see, so it's very, very runny. Then the next thing to do, and a real key thing, is to make sure you don't have loads of this on the brush so that surface tension, the liquid, doesn't pull it away from where you want it to be. So I'm using tissue to remove excess, and then I'm just going to draw up a very small amount, so I've not got very much on my brush at all there. And with that prepared, then we can start applying it. And what we're looking for are flatter areas such as the shield once again, where we layered it earlier. We just want to thinly apply this onto those flat parts. So very thinly there like that, just sweeping it round and gradually building it up. So we're starting to really bring that shine forth even more. So just areas there like that, so you can see it just makes it paler and paler the more I apply. Now in addition, at this stage we want to make sure we bring this right up to sharper edges, because we're going to highlight on those later. So for the actual rim of the shield, we want to make sure we go around this as well and just take it all the way around. But remember, on these parts that are flat around this center part here, we again want to glaze this color onto it. So just thinly apply it like that so we get that cleaner gold on that area. With that now done and all that gold, we can move on to highlighting it, and for this now we need to move to an even brighter colour, so we're going for a platinum colour here. What I'm going to use is some Canoptek alloy, and to apply it, definitely go for your fine brush, and I'm using my 00 here because now we're looking to highlight these details, and really then it's a matter of just picking out all the sharpest features and edges, so edge highlighting essentially on all these parts. And this will include all the gold, including all the little bangles and details that appear on the club. Now the trick to it is to make sure the paint's correctly thinned, just for that smoothness, so it's going to flow well from your brush. It's this sort of point just here. It's a little bit translucent, but you can see it's a little bit runny too, but it's not so runny that it's just going out of control from my brush. So that's really good there. Then just make sure you haven't overloaded it, using some tissue as you need to remove excess paint, and then you're ready to go. So we want to pick out all the edges, and for the shield, it's actually quite easy to get a large part of it by just using the side of your brush and just skimming along, a bit like when we were highlighting some of those sharp scales earlier on. And this way you can go all the way around, just turn the model as you need to make sure you're comfortable so that you're always approaching in this way so you have that control as you put it on. Now there are times where you'll need to use the tip of your brush really, and that's going to be areas like this pattern that we've got just here. In this case, just make sure you're nice and steady, really brace your hands together, and then gently move in with the tip of the brush and apply the paint in this downward motion, just carefully following that edge. Just taking your time, so this way you get to highlight this area as well. And with that, the metallics are now all completed, and so what we can do is move on to highlighting those other small details that are scattered around the miniature, and we'll start out with a stone in the club. For this we need a nice lighter grey to highlight it, so I'm going to use some wizard grey here, and then what we'll do is move on to the mouth. We'd start out with some glistening gums to highlight the tongue, and then for the teeth and the claws we need a light bone colour, so I'm going to use some vampire fang here. Finally, you need to highlight those straps on the body, and for this what I'm going to go for is some fur cloak. But first of all, what we need is that grey, so I'm going to use some wizard grey here, and to apply it I'm again going for the size 1 brush, because for this I'm just going to be doing an edge highlight again, and it's nice and easy to get to this because the edges are so well defined for this detail. So what you got to do is just make sure that paint is thinned correctly and not overloaded on your brush. Once you've got that prepared, you just need to look for those edges, and what we're going for are things like these sharp edges along here, where using the side of the brush we just want to skim all the way down it, so all the way down there. In addition, if you want to, you can highlight any designs that appear in the middle, such as just here. In this case it's going to be another edge highlight again, but just make sure you use the tip of the brush for this feature. Just angle so you're painting in that downward motion, and just carefully follow that edge all the way down. Once that club's done, we can then move on to the inside of the mouth with some glistening gums, and here we need to highlight the tongue first of all. So to do this, just on either side, just follow it just the way down here, going up to the tip, and also we've got this little bit of flesh visible right here, which we just need to highlight with a line just running down there. Next up we need some vampire fang, and with this we're looking for a highlight first of all on the teeth, and all we need to do is just very carefully dot them just to help them stand out, so along here for example, and if you want to you can also use it just to highlight the tip of the tongue, so just a little bit right there. Now in addition there are the claws to highlight at this stage, and here we're looking for the sharper ridges on them, so if we go to this one on the foot down here, that means just highlighting across the top of it, so just a line running down there, and then a little bit just underneath it right there. And finally we can move on to highlighting these leather straps, and for this I'm going to use some fur cloak, and here we're looking for the edge just running along the length of it, and it's just a matter of gently following along, so just here for example, and just along here. And with that, we're now ready for the final detail, which is to paint in the Saurus Warriors' eyes. And for this, what we're going to do is first of all pick it out with some yellow, using some Skulker yellow. Now you can leave it there if you want to, but if you want to take it a little bit further, you can then add the pupil. And if you want to do this, you'll need a pitch black. So in this case, I'm going to use some Doom Death black. But first we need that Skulker yellow, and for this you definitely want to go for your finest brush, because of course it is the eyes, so they are very small. Now on the palette, just make sure you got that under control, so the paint's nicely thin, so that it's going to go exactly where you want it to go. Just bringing it down to about this point here, so it's a little bit runny, and then remember the key thing, remove the excess paint off your brush with some tissue just to make sure it's not overloaded. Let's get a small amount then, and then we're ready to go. And so what you need to do is just make sure you're really steady and really braced, so really brace your hands together like that so you're not shaking. Just gently move the brush in from this angle along the length of the eye and just run it into that detail right there. So we just pick it out with that yellow right there. And then finally you can add in the pupil as an optional step using a little bit of a pitch black. So here I've got Doom Death black, and we just want to very gently go in at the eye like this, and it's all about just painting a little straight line right in the middle of that yellow. So we're looking at going right in there like that. Now with this done, the miniature is then ready to be based, and as ever it's entirely your call what basing scheme you go for, but in this case I'm going to go for a swamp base. And here we have the completed Saurus Warrior ready to do his part in enacting the great plan. So as you've seen when painting these miniatures, what you need to do first of all is just spend a bit of time painting all that flesh and just playing around with the tones until you're happy, after which point it's just a matter of painting in all those smaller details. So have fun painting your Saurus Warriors, and we'll see you again very soon.